I think humans have always liked quick fixes. I don't think
Mhm.
that's anything new. I think it's our nature to look for a shortcut, to take the easy route. And it's hard to change habits, and it's hard to change lifestyle, and it's hard to change diet. It's hard to rewire thought processes and patterns. Like, I get it. It's a lot easier to say, just give me the pill, or just give me the peptide, or just give me the drug.
Right.
But I will just continue to preach it from the get-go, because true root cause healing and true functional health is diet and lifestyle oriented. And then the other stuff can augment.
All right. Hey, guys. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the First Optimal Podcast. Really excited here. We have Allie Fahrenbach here, and she is a certified health coach, went through some pretty extensive training for what she does. She's been a pro figure athlete and really a really solid content creator, someone I definitely highly recommend you guys follow and check out. We'll have all that information in the show notes. A lot of great information. Looking forward to unpack it today. So thanks for joining the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you have a podcast as well. So a lot of great content on there. So I know you're really busy. And again, I think our audience is going to be, super pleased with a lot of stuff you cover today. But tell us, just if you could, just to kick things off, like, how did your whole fitness journey start? What did all this come from?
Um, oh gosh. I mean, I was always athletic as a child. I grew up athletic. I was athletic in high school, primarily track and cross country. I ran cross country in college. And I started lifting fairly early as well. I found the gym at the age of 18. I did my first bodybuilding competition that same year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know. And I would say that bodybuilding was probably the big catalyst for me into the physique space, into understanding um, the impact that nutrition had on initially how my body could look. I was very aesthetics focused.
Yeah.
My major in college was sports science, and I had a minor in wellness. Um, and then throughout my competitive career, as I progressed, and being a woman and competing naturally, and as I started dealing with the hormonal and digestive ramifications of the stress that I was placing on my physiology, I started to become very interested in the health aspect of things
Oh, yeah.
and the interconnectedness between the function of the body internally and the presentation of the body externally. And I think often there's a disconnect between the two. There's an assumption that if somebody looks a certain way on the outside, they must be healthy on the
Right.
inside. Or there's an assumption that health on the inside doesn't manifest in how your body looks on the outside. And my personal experience and my experience as a coach says, no, that's like not true. So I started really getting into the functional stuff, mostly because I was having my own issues. They were issues that were unable to be corrected or even really addressed through conventional channels. And so I started learning on my own, and then eventually went back to school.
Yep.
I initially went to the Institute of Integrative Health in New York for health coaching. And then I went through FDN for more of a functional lens. And I've sat through a ton of certifications since. And it's mostly just because, and I know you know this, but, the functional realm, even though flawed, has so much to offer, and so many
Sure.
gaps to fill that are left by conventional medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I find it really interesting, just going back to the start of what you're saying too. Little bit of my story quickly, and then I'll make
Mhm.
my point, I guess. But yeah, it's funny. So I was 12 years old and picked up the Arnold Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, like many men my age, and was like, "Oh, I can do this all natural. Look at how good he looks. I could look this way," and just started lifting
Yeah.
weights. And I did the same thing. So I didn't realize that beforehand. But yeah, competing at 18, I started as a teen bodybuilder, and I bring some of that up because I think there's a couple I don't know if they're misunderstandings or maybe just like a perception thing with kind of the general population out there is if someone's like yourself who's been to one extreme of physique, usually for the most part, if you there's some parts that are unhealthy that I'm sure we both experienced, as you mentioned a little bit, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But usually they um have a deeper understanding of like nutrition and how to take, if you're dropping 20, 30, 40 pounds and you're already pretty lean, that's extremely difficult versus someone who's maybe sedentary and 70, 80, 90 pounds overweight to help them. And it doesn't mean their journey is any easier. It just means like the application is. So I really think it's great when there's a coach or who has that as a initial foundation.
Mhm.
But then, as you mentioned, taking it those extra layers deeper,
Mhm.
going through the functional training just adds such a whole nother dynamic. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, like some people think, oh, I'm never going to look that way, or I don't want to look that way. It's like, stop with the look. Just you're you and your own journey. And I'm curious to hear about what were some of the first things, you kind of aha moments when you first started getting into your functional certifications, because those are reputable certifications for those who don't know. They're not easy to get. It's not a one day kind of class, right?
Right. Um, so I guess you're asking about the issues that I went through personally.
Yeah, just like what were some of the first things you kind of experienced and
So
learned?
gut issues were my first one, hands down. I have like anybody who follows me knows this too.
Sure.
I started having a ton of gastrointestinal issues in 2012, I think. And from 2012 to 2014, I exhausted conventional channels, several gastroenterologists, like, all the things. And it was always just you have IBS, you're stressed, it's in your head, you need Miralax, like eat more
Right.
fiber. I mean, I'm sure you've heard this kind of stuff. And none of it was helpful for me. And so I just started reading and learning on my own, right? I
Mm,
was like, this does not sit well with my soul. I pressed into prayer. I was like, I'm just going to start to pursue my own knowledge in this regard. Somewhere in and around that same time frame, I lost my menstrual cycle, which up until then I had always had, even though I was competing. But as I started pushing the upper echelons of conditioning, once I went pro as a natural figure athlete, at that time the look that was being rewarded in natural figure was very lean.
mm,
So I had to get really lean, and I lost my menstrual cycle, and I lost it for 12 years. And initially when I lost it, I was in my late 20s. I was so consumed with competing, I didn't really care that much. I was like, it'll come back.
sure.
But then it never did. And the
Mm,
longer it didn't come back, and the more I learned about the importance of the menstrual cycle, the more I was like, why has my cycle like not come back? So those were my two primary issues, gastrointestinal issues, and then the loss of my menstrual cycle, which is why I'm so passionate about gut health and hormone health when it
mhm.
comes to women, and I do primarily coach women. And I also find that those are two issues that most women deal with, and not coincidentally, they're connected issues. So,
Yeah, I would like to, because gut health, like, as you mentioned, it's such a tricky puzzle, and I think a lot of people have the best of intentions, a lot of supplements, a lot of things out there.
yeah.
But I'm wondering, I think it'd be helpful if you could maybe first, if we could start with, for the audience out there, your personal journey, like what was
Mhm.
off with your gut health? What protocols did you try that didn't work, and what did work, and just kind of walk us through that.
Yeah. So initially, I struggled a lot with constipation. And then I started having the opposite effect. I could not stop going to the bathroom. Like everything just went through me. Everything upset my stomach. I always had bloating. I always felt horrible. And, at that point, initially, I did all of what I would consider to be like the standard things recommended by conventional medicine. So, I tried like low FODMAP diets. I tried elimination diets. I tried restriction diets. I won't say that I didn't get relief, because things did give me relief for a little bit, but honestly, all I wound up with was food fear. Like
Sure.
I was so afraid to eat anything. Um, and then I was diagnosed finally with ulcerative colitis. They
Okay.
found colitis in my sigmoid colon. And at the time it was just, well, this is something that you have and you're going to have to deal with it for the rest of your life. And I really went down I tried a lot of different things to heal my gut through nutrition and through lifestyle.
Mhm.
And I'm totally going a little bit off here, but I'm also a Christian, and a huge part of me also just surrendered this aspect of my health to the Lord.
Mhm.
And I just prayed for healing,
Yeah.
because I do deeply believe that there is a spiritual component to whether we heal or don't heal.
Mhm.
Um, and by God's grace, I had a colonoscopy that came back and I had no colitis in
Mm.
2020, and I have not had any issues since. Now, throughout that time, I also had H. pylori, I had SIBO. And so I think there were a lot of underlying things that were creating that inflammation that I was able to correct. I don't necessarily even know if that diagnosis was correct. I don't really care at this point.
Sure.
I've not had gut issues in years. I eat a very wide variety of foods. I don't have fear around food. My cycle's back. I feel phenomenal. I think with gut health, there's a lot of fascination and fixation with it, and
Mhm.
understandably so, because I do really believe that the gut is the gateway to health in the body. But I feel people go about it the wrong way. In other words, people fixate on the supplements and the
Mm.
probiotics and the GI maps and the, stool testing and things like that, and the parasite cleanses and the detox juices. And they don't really focus on what actually creates a strong gastrointestinal system to begin with, a robust gut microbiome,
Mhm.
which is good sleep, nervous system regulation, which I like to say, versus stress management, eating a wide variety of nutrient dense foods, right? Cultivating that robust and healthy microbiota so you have that good balance. There's a misfocus.
Sure.
People are focusing on the minutia instead of pulling those big levers for change. Um,
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and I think one thing I did want to comment on. I appreciate you bringing it up because, if someone I share in your faith, and if someone's
Mhm.
a non-believer, that's okay. I think there's two ways they can look at this. For the audience out there, things may just happen to you, and then you try to create something good out of it. And then if you're a person of faith, you believe, okay, God gave me this trial or thing to work through, then I'm going to work through it and then use it to bring glory to him through my knowledge, education, and practical good, which you being a person of faith sounds like you're doing that, which is as much as you don't want to say like, well, that's fantastic, you had all these issues. I think it kind of is, right? Because
It's
as we have these issues, like, there's like-minded people and they're like, oh, she doesn't understand me, she was a pro figure, she's she's miss all that. And then you're like, well, whoa, hold on, like, let me tell you my story. And then you're like, oh, or
I
simple
think
things I know that's happened in my life where it's like, no, 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 like, I'm not, I would, I at my core, I am not a great person. Like, we all have our flaws. Like, don't let that kid you. And so I think, you were saying earlier about like the physical judging them and just kind of thinking about that. But you were going to say something there and I kept rambling. So I apologize.
No, you just said something, and it resonated with me, and it's that I think as believers we recognize that in Christ our pain has a purpose.
Mm,
It's not that I'm necessarily thrilled that I went through what I went through. It was
sure.
incredibly difficult, but I do think that that season of my life deepened my faith, it strengthened my faith, it reaffirmed um my peace in Jesus. I mean, I think that's the most powerful aspect of being a Christian, and being able to surrender certain aspects of your life into his hands and into his sovereignty, and reaping the peace that comes from that,
Mm,
because we live such stress-filled lifestyles.
mm,
And I work with so many women who struggle with anxiety, and who struggle with fear and who struggle with worry and who struggle with the need to control and who struggle with that type A like personality. And that type of personality, which I resonate with because it's me too, but that'll manifest in how your body functions and in how your body feels and in how your body looks, because that type of pressure and stress is debilitating. So I find that reaching a point, and I reached a point in my own health journey where I realized there's only so much I can do.
Mhm.
And when I can't, I have to trust that Christ will step in and fill that gap. I have to trust that, I'm still going to do everything that I can to take care of my body and heal my gut, but then I have to let go of everything else that I don't have control over and just trust that it will be what it will be, and it will be in his hands. And there's a peace that comes from that. And that
Sure.
peace takes away that anxiety, and
Right.
it takes away that stress, and it takes away that performative based mentality. And so in doing that, I peeled back so many layers of stress and anxiety that were probably just manifesting in my gut and in my hormones and in my health and in my well-being.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, like, for those out there, like, if we're talking about something that's a kind of a foreign concept to you,
Mhm.
I would just phrase it this way as well, just to add another, maybe dimension to it, is like, it's just that it goes back to kind of like that victim mentality versus like that, mentality of empowerment, and there's options and how
Mhm.
to kind of take control of things. And people have different beliefs and faiths and things, and that's just ours that we share, and we believe that to be true. And so I think it's just a cool, like a really good part, cool part about your story as you work through that. And I did want to kind of touch on the hormone journey as well, because I know there's several layers to this. And for those who don't know, I gave Allison an outline, and I think I already got off of it. So I'll work to
Yeah,
get
it's
back to it.
okay.
I'll work to get back to it. So we do our best here, but I am the guy behind the mic who has a hard time following it. But you were mentioned earlier about, like, I think it'd be good for the audience to hear about your journey with some of the hormone issues. I mean, and you mentioned, I mean, that's a long time, right? 12
Mhm.
years without the menstrual cycle. What was some of the thoughts around what caused it? And then what are some steps you took to kind of circle back from a,
Yeah, so
nutrition or lifestyle?
initially, like I said, I wasn't that concerned that I lost it. I was not trying to have kids or anything like that. I wasn't trying to
Mhm.
get pregnant. Um, I was really into competing. I just didn't care. And
Yeah.
at the time, I didn't really know any better either, if I'm being honest. Um, I think that I had a very, very limited knowledge of the importance of the female menstrual cycle for overall female health, right? And I think that that's a disservice that we do to women. In other words, I don't think enough education is given to women when they get their menstrual cycle about the importance of the period beyond just reproduction. What the production of those hormones do for our overall health. So I didn't have any understanding of that. In my mind, I was like, I'm not trying to get pregnant. So what does it really matter?
Sure.
But again, as I started learning and I started educating myself, I was kind of like, I really need to get my period back. Like, why has this not happened?
Mhm.
And I tried most of what I would consider to be the standard things. I rested more, I trained less, I ate more, I put some weight on. I do tend to have a very slender physiology. So even as a young teenager, I lost my menstrual cycle often. So I
Mhm.
would lose it a lot in high school. And whenever my mother took me to the doctor, it was always, well, she's too active and she's too thin. I mean, and
Mhm.
I never didn't eat. I was just a slender person.
Sure.
Um, so even when I gain weight, I don't really get fatty. Like I don't put on a ton of fat.
Mhm.
And so I just wasn't getting it back. I went to my PCP, and even though I loved him at the time, he was like, "Were you trying to get pregnant?" And I said, "No." And he's like, "Does it really matter?" And I was like, Yes. Because my progesterone was like a 0.5 and my estradiol was like a 3. I mean, I had no hormones. My testosterone was a 6.
Mm.
And I tested for pituitary tumors. I mean, I was fixated on it, on trying to get it back for a while. And what changed my approach was, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Victoria Felkar and her work.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I had her on my podcast prior. I
Okay.
used to be a partner with a good friend of mine in a supplement company, and we had Victoria on, and he was kind of known her for years, and yeah, yeah. So very familiar with Victoria. Sorry, go ahead.
So she and I both share a former coach. John Meadows was
Oh
my
yeah,
coach for
yeah. I knew
for
John. Yeah.
years, and he was her coach. And
Mm,
we sort of knew each other from that. And then I knew that she was, into female hormone health and things like that. And she mentioned something on a podcast, and I reached out to her about it. And she was talking about how just our thoughts as women,
mm,
negative body image, mental stress that we place on ourselves can cause the cessation of our cycle, can cause us to lose our periods, because that's how sensitive our periods are. And I did a consultation with her, and we talked about a bunch of things. And I realized that I was placing so much stress on trying to get my period back that in and of itself could potentially be why I wasn't getting my cycle. And so again, I'm going to circle back to it. I just let go. I
mm.
stopped trying to get my cycle back. And I said, I'm just going to focus on being healthy, on getting good sleep,
Yep.
on eating really well. And then I'm going to let God do just going to let him do what he's going to do. And I'm not making this up. This is not a joke. Like, I prayed this on December 31st of 2021. I said, Lord, I need you to do a new thing in my health this coming year, whatever that is, whatever that looks like. Just do a work in me. And I woke up January 1st, 2022, and I had a period. And that first year, I had 3 periods. That was it. I didn't rush off to get hormones. I didn't like rush off to do anything or try to force the
Yeah.
cycle to be anything other than it was. I just told myself, my system is learning how to work again. Just let it go. Just let your body do what it knows to do. 2023, I had 6 periods. 2024, I had 12. And I have had a consistent menstrual cycle within 30 to 35 days ever since. And so I just gave my body the space and the time and the permission it needed to do what it needs to do. And I do believe that there is something to be said for, we don't fix the body. We position the body to
To
fix
fix.
itself.
Yes. Yep.
It knows what to do. It's really just about giving it the tools that it needs, and then giving it the space and the permission to take care of itself, and to not be so impatient,
Yeah.
to not, even when I coach women sometimes, like, well, why isn't my period back? Why isn't, I had one cycle and now it's gone again. And I'm like, just breathe and give it time. Like, it will come, because I support a lot of women who are coming off of hormonal birth control. So sometimes they'll get a period post pill after they come off the birth control, and then it goes away for another month or 2. And they're freaking out. And I'm like, just be patient. It's
Yeah.
okay. Like, don't be stressed about it. It will happen. And so that's how my cycle came back. And it's been consistent ever since.
Well, a couple, gosh, so much comes to mind, but one thing first off, I want to say is like, thank you for sharing that detail, because I appreciate the time frame, and I think our audience will too, because I think a lot of times people, what's wrong with me?
Right.
I only had the one, or I only,
Mhm.
whatever the case may be, whatever the thing is they're battling. It's like, you just explained over 3 years of working through this, to
Mhm.
get to kind of that point. So I think that's a really good nugget for people to walk away with, and remember the patience piece. Um, Gosh, I have to say this because I can't get it out of my brain. But a funny little thing is a two part. One is, so my wife and our wedding song was Guns N' Roses "Patience" because
That's
she
awesome.
was so impatient with me, and I used to sing it to her, just a little patience, and
That's
she
awesome.
would just punch me so hard. So definitely see that. And one of the things I wanted to get your opinion on, and then I want to come back to some of the hormones, but
Mhm.
and for the women listening, feel free. I'm not offended. You can roll your eyes at me because I am a guy, so I don't know anything when it comes to being a woman in this world. But what I've observed, I have a few daughters, my wife, and other women in my family and friends. It does seem like, gosh, like generationally, um, the stressors like put on women is just so much different than say the last 2 or 3 generations. Like from my perspective, at least, as a man outside looking in, it's they got to look a certain way and be super fit woman. B, you have to be super mom. Like the kids cannot miss anything at school. You have to be at every single thing that they have going on. Otherwise, you're a failure because your mom was there, but your mom also didn't work maybe or work as much
Mhm.
maybe generally like if you look societally 40 years ago whatever. And then, oh, by the way, you have to be Miss Bad Boss and run a company or be an executive or be this high level performer too. And it just seems like so many women I've talked to, even in consultations, like when they show up, it's like just so tense and there's so much pressure on them. I think you're hitting the nail on the head where it's like you got to let go. The inside of your body is just fighting, battling so bad, working against everything positive you're trying to do. And I do believe a lot of it's kind of these outside pressures. Again, as a guy, I could be totally wrong on this, but that's just kind of my 2 cents. And of course, I'm gonna forget her name. I got this kind of thought from I heard at a conference, the COO, I think she still is, of Facebook. Oh, it'll come to me later. She had a book called Lean In and was
Mhm.
basically talking about how, like, when her husband dropped the kids off, even though she was running Facebook, the comment was, "Oh, mommy forgot that it's blue shirt day." And it's like, well, that was like, well, how about dad forgot it? And it just kind of stuck with me because I
Yeah.
had young girls and my wife. And the reason why it stuck with me, I'll throw myself on the bus and I'll stop rambling here. But so you know how men's shirt, where do we button our shirts with men? In the
Mhm.
front. Where do girls button their dresses?
Oh my
Usually it's
gosh.
in the back, right? Yeah, in the
Yeah.
back. What do you think dad did when he took his kids to the daycare at work at Lifetime years ago? So I put the dresses on backwards.
Oh my
So
gosh.
it was right around the same time when that happened.
Yep.
And I heard that talk and I was like, hey, it was me. It was me. I'm like, don't blame my wife. So
Yeah.
because I walked in, all the ladies at the child center, they're just going, oh, Joe, we love you, but man. And I'm like, what are you talking about? My daughter's just cruising in there with a backward
Right.
dress on. So I don't know where I was going with that, but thoughts on the stress out there on women in today, and when a woman's coming in to see you, I
Mhm.
guess I think that's where I was going. Like, what's the mental state like?
I do agree with you. I think I think it's important to distinguish the difference between the genders and how the genders respond to stress, and that in
Mm,
general, men's bodies, I didn't say minds, but their
yeah,
bodies are more stress resilient than women's bodies are. And that's by design because women are built, whether we do or don't, we are built to carry and sustain life. So our bodies are more protective and our bodies are more responsive and reactive to stress in our environment, to stress in our minds, to stress on our bodies. So I think collectively, when you start to look at all of the stress that women experience, it's not a wonder to me that women tend to have more autoimmune diseases. They tend to have more
mm,
gastrointestinal issues. They tend to have more hormone imbalances than men do. Um, and I do think that unfortunately, some of it is because we've been sold the lie that women should be able to do everything and be everything and have everything. And we have to take care of everyone except ourselves.
right.
And it's simply not true. Um, we're not built physically to be able to withstand the stress of a high powered career, having a family, having a husband, taking care of aging parents, making sure that we don't age in our faces, making sure that our
Sure.
bodies are taken care of. Are we getting to Pilates? Are we eating the food? Are we doing the, we're not meant to be able to do all of that. And I think what you mentioned about the pressures being greater now than on earlier generations, I think a lot of that has to do with social media.
Mm,
And, if you think about it, and I'm not sure how old you are, but I'm 41. And so
mhm,
when I grew up, the only people I could compare myself to were my classmates, really,
yeah.
like the immediate pool of kids that I knew.
Mhm,
So you're talking about comparing yourself to this time, which is enough, right? But it's
sure.
still, you're talking about comparing yourself to this tiny little group of kids. Well, now we have this thing in our hand that we open and we're comparing ourselves to the whole world in an instant. And we're doing it multiple times a day, whether that be comparing, our house or how our kids look or our meals, right? My meals don't look like that person's meals. Like I don't have these neat little, workouts, how our faces look, how our bodies look, what clothes we wear. There's just a ton of comparison. And I think that places a whole lot of unnecessary mental pressure on women.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, again, I'm painting with a broad brush here, but just some of my experience, like men seem to struggle more. I think you said it brilliantly, like their bodies are made for the stress, but they seem to struggle more with like mental health because we're terrible at communicating and talking about our
Correct.
feelings and all that stuff. And then women on the flip side, at least from my observation, seem to be doing better with the mental for the most part, but the body is where the issues start to pop up. And it's almost like this feeling of guilt I hear from women sometimes when we're, engaging with them on some of their issues about, it's like, it's okay, take care of yourself. Like you don't have to keep justifying why you're, exploring these things to help correct yourself. So I do find that, yeah, I think that's a really good point, I guess, is what I was getting at with that when you were kind of explaining the differences. That's a very good point to bring up.
Thank you.
I did want to, just for the audience out there too, to talk a little bit about the why a menstrual cycle is important to a woman's health.
Mhm.
Why you found out? What did you find out about how not
Yeah.
having it? What are some of the downsides of that from a health standpoint?
So I think women are educated, like, okay, we get this bleed every month,
Mm,
but we don't really know what that means. And we're not taught about ovulation, which is really like the crown jewel of the menstrual cycle. So I think it's important for women to know that ovulation is how we produce hormones. So if we don't ovulate, we don't produce that progesterone. We don't produce that estradiol. We don't produce this bolus of hormones that is so very important, not just for reproductive purposes, but for brain health, for physical
mhm,
health, for bone health. Um, I always use the analogy that Dr. Lara Briden uses because I adore her work. And she always says, we would never say that men only need testosterone for reproduction. So,
mhm,
why on earth would we say that women only need progesterone and we only need estradiol if we intend to make a baby? That's completely not true.
mhm.
And so that's really what I learned about the menstrual cycle and why it is so important for women to ovulate. And it's also why I'm passionate about educating on birth control as well, because not that I'm anti birth control, but because a lot of women use birth control and don't really understand that it's not suppressing the cycle, it's shutting down the system.
Mm.
It's literally years that you're not producing those hormones that you need for the health of your brain, for the health of your bones, for insulin sensitivity, for muscle development, like all of it. So,
And when someone comes to you, say they were on birth control, pick a
mhm,
number, 10 years, and
yep.
they're transitioning, trying to fix their hormone health. I know there's a lot of nuance, and this isn't a
Mhm.
prescriptive question here, but what
Yeah.
are some things that you do first with a client to kind of help them start this journey of cleaning up their hormone health?
If they plan to come off of birth control.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously, you're right. There's nuance involved. It's all about context and the individual person. But the areas of support, and I have a whole entire episode in my podcast on this, on supporting your hormones coming off of birth control. If anybody
Mm.
feels like they really want to listen to a deep dive, but I focus on nutrient deficiencies first because most forms of birth control, and they all work differently. So again, I'm
Sure.
speaking very broadly here. I'm
Mhm.
not speaking about just one method or another, tend to create nutrient depletion. So you're looking at a woman who's, if she's been on birth control for 10 years, as you said, she's probably nutrient depleted in a lot of areas. So I work on replenishing nutrients. That's like a big focus of mine. Yes, through diet, but usually also through supplementation as well, because we're talking about repletion here.
Right.
The interesting thing is there's actually recommendations to doctors from studies that say women put on OCP, so oral contraceptive pill, should be evaluated for nutrient deficiencies while they're on the pill. And I'm like,
Mhm.
what OBGYN do you know that tests their women for nutrient deficiencies? I don't know of a single one. neither here nor there. So I focus on nutrient deficiencies. I focus on gastrointestinal health because the gut microbiome takes a whomping when you're on most forms of birth control. I focus on addressing any issues with the cycle that were present before the birth control was in place. So a lot of women that take birth control do not actually take birth control for the prevention of pregnancy.
Yeah.
They actually take birth control for the regulation of their cycle. So I have an in-depth conversation with my clients like, hey, what was your cycle like before you took birth control, if they can remember? Did you have heavy periods? Did you have a lot of acne around your cycle? Did you have bloating? What happened there, and how can we support, individually? I look at supporting insulin sensitivity, looking into the thyroid. The thyroid can take a hit on birth control. I think I hit most of the things that I do. Supporting progesterone production is a big one too, making sure that we're supporting ovulation as best we can.
I do want to go a layer deeper on that, but there's something you said there that I think is important to bring up, because I've seen this happen plenty of times, and I'm not a dermatologist, so I can't go deep on this. But what I was going to say is women that were put on birth control for acne, and it turned out it was bacterial. It had nothing to do with their hormones. And it's like, so not only didn't solve it, but they were on it for years thinking it was going to help them. And I was just like, until I heard it, this is years ago when I heard it, but I was just like, oh yeah, like it just didn't connect the dots, because like I said, it's just not anything I've ever really dove into until recently, working with some people much, much smarter than me on that side of things, was like, oh, okay, that was eye-opening. So I think that's a really good point too, is like, why did you go on it? And, did you investigate the solution? I'm sure the physician had the best of intentions, but they misfire, right? There could be something off there.
And what young girl do you know that's going to, the 14, 15, 16, that's going to ask a question of a doctor like that, and, adolescence is awkward enough as it is. Most women or most young girls who are struggling with acne, if they're taken to a doctor and the doctor says, here, I'll give you this and your acne will go away, they're like, yes, please, just give it to me. And they just don't know, any better to ask any questions. I just think it's unfortunate, because if we think about this logically, most women experience menstrual irregularities and side effects from menstruation within the first few years of obtaining their cycle. So we're talking about 11, 12, 13, 14. And it's because the system is learning how to work. The system is coming online. So there's glitches. It's wonky. And instead of, again, here's this patience component, but instead of being patient and just allowing the body to, just seeing if you can ride it out, there's this rush to just slap a pharmaceutical on it and alleviate the discomfort. And it's the same as the transition, perimenopause into menopause. The system's going offline. So what's happening then? And I'm in perimenopause. It's wonky. It's glitchy. The system's going like this because it's going offline. So it's like a second puberty. And again, sometimes even in perimenopause and menopause, and again, I'm in no way opposed to hormone therapy at all, but there's a rush to just try to band-aid it, instead of just saying, just kind of let the system go offline, try to manage the symptoms as best you can, and don't rush to the pharmaceuticals or the hormones necessarily right away, because I've seen horribly implemented hormone therapy, and I've seen it do far worse than it would have been if you maybe had to just left yourself alone.
Right. That's why there's this whole field now, right? Like, it's because unfortunately, best of intentions, but it's people kind of unravel it, because that's a big focus. Like, we're always looking at like a nutrition assessment, start with your activity. What are you doing? The table stakes, like, hydration, sunlight, activity, nutrition, and then maybe some pharmaceutical intervention if you absolutely need it to kind of push you there. But that's something people probably don't hear.
Therapy receptiveness is contingent on the environment that you're putting those hormones into too. So if you're putting, that's another thing I see a lot, is women taking hormone therapy and they're like, I don't feel any better.
Yes.
So it's not even maybe that they're getting negative effects, it's that they're getting net effect.
Nothing.
Right? No effect. Like I've still got the hot flashes. I've still got the night sweats. I've still, I'm still feeling horrible. And it's it's like, well, because nobody took a look at the health of the environment that you're putting those hormones into. Is your gut online? How's your, again, I like to say nervous system regulation versus stress management. How's your sleep? Like, what are your habits like? What's your lifestyle like? Are you creating an environment that's receptive to receiving these hormones and then responding properly? And that's a lot more complex than just take the hormone and you get X result type of thing.
Yeah, no, it's you spot on. There's one patient that comes to mind where they had 3 children under 5, mold issue in their home that had to be
Mhm.
remediated, and they moved across the country, and they were
Yeah.
on testosterone and weren't feeling it. I'm like,
Maybe
I'm
because,
not a practitioner, right? We
yeah.
have physicians and stuff, but I was like, maybe it's not the testosterone dose. Like,
Yeah.
you kind like, did you hear yourself what you just said? And I'm not saying
Yeah.
it to be condescending, of course. It was more just like sometimes you need someone to be that sounding board and say it back to you, and they're like, oh. So I think that's a really good point that a lot of people skip over because whether it's GLP-1s or
Mhm.
hormones or testosterone, people just show up with the thing. Like, I want the new iPhone, I want the new GLP-1, I want the testosterone. And it happens with men too. Like, with men's
Mhm.
health is just like, I need testosterone. Well, why? Well, I feel this and this. Okay, like, let's test first. Like, I mean, again, like, if you're healthy and
Mhm.
there's not a reason to deny it, like, that's fine. But why don't we slow this down and take a look at your overall health? So I think that's a really good a great approach and a great point for people to kind of let settle in as they're approaching some of these things.
Yeah, I always say hormone therapy can help, but it's not going to be the big lever. It's not the panacea, I think, that it's made out to be on social media. And
Right.
I think humans have always liked quick fixes. I don't think
Mhm.
that's anything new. I think it's our nature to look for a shortcut, to take the easy route. And it's hard to change habits, and it's hard to change lifestyle, and it's hard to change diet. It's hard to rewire thought processes and patterns. Like, I get it. It's a lot easier to say, just give me the pill, or just give me the peptide, or just give me the drug.
Right.
But I will just continue to preach it from the get-go, because true root cause healing and true functional health is diet and lifestyle oriented. And then the other stuff can augment, but you have to create that foundation first.
Right.
So even though it's hard, that's really the only way you get to the actual root cause of what's going on. There's all this, root cause chitty chat in functional health. And then you have that same person talking about root cause who's writing you a 30 supplement
I
long
think that's just
protocol
about to
with,
say.
yeah, with like, peptide therapy and all kinds of other things. And I'm going, you don't have a GLP-1 deficiency. You need to, like, eat protein and fiber at regular times throughout the day. And let's do that first and go from there, type of thing.
Yeah, yeah. No, so nutrition's kind of the common thing that's come up in a few examples here. So I'm curious to, what do you do for determining nutrition deficiencies, and what methods do you use?
So I look at dietary intakes when I first work with a client. So I ask them to log their food for
Mhm.
me, write down everything they eat for 3 days.
Mhm.
I don't let them do a recall. I make them do it moving forward. And I say, don't change anything about your eating habits. If you eat differently on the weekend, great. Show me one of those days. I want to
Right.
see the time of day that you eat. I want to see what you're eating. What types of foods are they flocking to? Am I noticing that they're reaching for convenience foods? Are they eating out a lot? Are they eating carbs in isolation? Are they going long periods without eating? Are they fasting forever? Are they overeating at night and snacking throughout the day, right? You can tell a lot about where somebody's nutrient status is, or even where their blood sugar balance is, just by looking at a log. If I'm seeing somebody who doesn't eat a meal, which I see a lot with women, but I see 9 feedings throughout the day where it's just picking, 6 almonds, 2
Mhm.
cookies, cheese stick,
Mhm.
4 fry. I mean, I've seen 4 fries and 2 bites of lasagna. Like, do you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like, some random stuff like that. And I'm going, well, we're nutrient deficient in everything. Like, I can
Right.
see it from there. I don't need to run a test.
Right.
So dietary intake tells me a lot about um, where somebody's nutrient status is at. And then I can correlate that with what they're telling me in their intake forms. Do they have energy crashes? Do they have food cravings? Are they gaining weight? Can they not sleep at night? Are they starving at night? They're not hungry in the morning? Like, I'm seeing all these things, and then I can correlate it to what's going on within their dietary intake, and I can start to see how we can course correct that. And so nutrition is definitely one of the first things I focus on.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think it's really, they overlap well, right? Like your 3 day plus the intake plus, how they're feeling. I did want to ask, how do you prep them psychologically to not cheat on those 3 days and to not, you know, someone's gonna be looking at this, right?
Yeah, I just tell them that the honesty with me is what positions me to help them.
Right.
Them being truthful with me, you're paying to work with me. You're
Mhm.
coming to me because you want the help. I can't help if I don't know. So the best thing you can do is just be honest with me about where you're at and what you're going through and what you're eating. And then, and there's no judgment on my end. And there truly is no judgment on my end.
Right.
I have seen it all. And we're all fallible in our own ways when it comes to nutrition. We've all had our own struggles around nutrition. I work with a lot of women who have patterns in their eating that are not unlike my patterns from when I was younger. Just because
Sure.
I am where I am now doesn't mean that I didn't once have the same issues, when I was young. Fat free this and low fat that, and keto cookies and low carb this, and I eat healthy, but
Right.
I'm drinking 4 times a week. But that's okay because it's not sugar, or snacking and not eating meals, or just restricting all the time and over exercising. And those are the bulk of the women that I work with. It's not that I don't have women come to me that are overeating, but the majority of the women that come to me are under. Maybe I should even rephrase this. They might be adequately fed in calories, but
Yeah.
they're undernourished in nutrients. I should probably say it that way.
Yeah, no, yeah, and of course, not only your practical experience, but the studies show that clearly about people miscalculating calories. There was some clickbait stuff where I think one of them was like up to 2 cheeseburgers a day, and another study showed like 1,500 calories off a day, and another one was like 800 calories. I mean, it's just massive differences, and it doesn't mean that people are lying or they're, not intelligent. It's the hormones are so overpowering. You mentioned I grabbed 2 cookies. Did you grab 2 or 3? We're not judging. Just, are you sure? Because
Yeah.
based on what you're eating, like, it's there's not enough, but so I think that's a good point. And then looking at the nutrient profiles of what they're taking in, and it sounds like you take a lot of time to do that. And I think that's a really good point to bring out is when you're looking for a coach out there, what is their process? What do they do? And if it's kind of a little too quick fix, a little too quick of a within 24 hours, you have this fully comprehensive plan. That's a head scratcher. It's like, wait a
Yeah.
minute. But what you're describing sounds like more of a progressive partnership that you're kind of walking through, these days, these intakes, and really just kind of adjusting those things. Um, with that, I'm curious to maybe some common deficiencies. Again, we're kind of painting with a broad brush here, but are there any, like, just if you had to pick the top 2 or 3 that pop up for people listening out there, what are some common deficiencies you see specifically in women's health?
Protein and fiber, like the two biggest ones. Most women do not eat enough fruit, or vegetables, and they simply don't get enough protein.
Mm,
So I like to start there because not coincidentally, these women also have a lot of food cravings, a lot of sugar cravings, a lot of fat craving, just food cravings. And
yep.
those cravings are causing them to not be, they're like, well, I can't be consistent because I have food cravings. But a lot of it hinges on they're just not eating enough protein. They're not eating enough fiber. So then they're not getting, again, if we look at protein, fruits, and vegetables, we're talking about things like antioxidants and polyphenols and vitamins and minerals and the trace things that people need, because we've got macronutrients, but we've got micronutrients.
Right.
And micronutrients come from whole single ingredient, largely unprocessed foods.
Hmm.
And I am a little old school in my approach here, and I don't necessarily like to say it's an eating clean approach or anything like that, but people who work with me are not going to get an if it fits your macros approach to nutrition.
Sure.
because I don't really work with a population that comes to me just wanting to lose weight. I always say you can lose weight on anything. Yes, you can lose weight on
Sure.
eating anything in a calorie deficit. Yes, that's true. But you're not going to lose weight, balance your hormones, have good gut health, and look and feel your best eating whatever. You're just
Right.
not. And most of the women I work with are aged 40 to 60. We're going through perimenopause and menopause. And so our bodies have a big need for nutrients. We have a big need for that nutrient density and that nourishment and the security and stability that that gives to our bodies during a time when hormones are going like this. And I always say habits inform hormones just as much as anything else. So you can do so much to improve your hormone health just by focusing on what you eat and how you live.
No, it's a really good point, and again, just to kind of reemphasize to everybody out there, like, yes, this is your practical experience, but I don't think there's one thing you've said that isn't played out, and not that it has to all play out in research, but that hits that home pretty well. Like I know in women's health, I want to say his name's Don Lemon. If I pronounce it right, he's out of University of Minnesota. He's a nutrition scientist. And there was a study that I found really interesting where it was like essentially women as a percent of calories eat less than what they need in protein, and it's much, much lower than men as a total percent of calories. And as they
Mhm.
age, their appetite goes down, but the percent doesn't change. So pick a number. Let's say they're getting 70 grams of protein a day, let's just say for discussion's sake, they needed 100. So they're already deficient in their 30s.
Mhm.
And then as those calories keep going down, the percent doesn't change. And then he was talking about in that he's seen women in their 60s, 70s getting like 20 grams, 25 grams a
Mhm.
day. And it's just like, oh my gosh, like that just stuck with me. It was like, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago, but I just,
Yeah.
it always pops in my brain when we're talking about some of this stuff, because it's a different way to look at it, because they're thinking like weight loss, calories, this is good, this is bad. And it's like, let's not, they're not like like you don't want to demonize one or the other. Like it's, how do they all work together?
Correct.
So
Yeah. 100%.
when it comes to fiber, is there a certain strategy you use to implement that? Is your target to get to say 25 grams a day? Do you kind of try to push that right away, or is there like a longer
My
runway? Or
usually, like if I'm starting with somebody, I mean, it really depends on where's the person at that I'm starting with, right? Is this a
sure,
person who's already nutrition savvy? Are they tracking? Are they paying attention? Do they even know what fiber is? Or am I starting with somebody who has zero, right? They're just eating willy-nilly. They're eating a standard American diet. They're barely getting enough fruits and vegetables, things like that. I'm literally just going to be like, eat a fruit or a vegetable with every single meal. Let's just start there. I have
mm,
somebody who's already tracking and who is already savvy. I will then say, I want you to hit X amount of fiber per day, and let's just see how that goes. How's your gut feel? How's your satiety? How's your appetite signaling? Etc. So it really just depends on where that person is, right? I'm very client centered. I want to meet the client where they're at.
yeah, it's a good point, because I think the communication is important, as you mentioned earlier, because I know it just friends and family. I had a nutrition scientist on a little while ago, and I haven't looked at my fiber in a while, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I was at like 5 grams or something crazy, 'cause I just wasn't paying attention to it. So as I started to add it in, started to share it with people, they're like, yeah, but my stomach, this and that. I'm like, yeah, but it's, you gotta take time and get your system used to it, but like work towards it. Don't just give
And
up
make
right
sure you're
away.
drinking enough water as well. I find a lot of people add fiber and they don't compensate by adding adequate water, and you have to make sure that you're hydrating as well.
Yeah. One of the segments I did want to try to squeeze in here, I
Mhm.
know, was just like some bullet points around common myths or misunderstandings that you see either on social media or as a client first comes in, questions you're being asked. What would be some kind of myth busters, if you will, that you have?
Yeah, relative to what topic?
I think anything relative to either women's health or excuse me, women's hormone health or weight loss. I think either of the two, whichever comes to mind.
I think a lot of women in the age demographic that I coach still think more is better.
Mm,
They still think it's all about eating less and exercising more. Um, I'm trying to think what other ones I wind up like busting.
What would that look like as far as the exercising more, could you give an idea of
They
what would be?
come to me, a lot of women come to me, and so they want to lose weight. That's really their ultimate goal. But we've also got hormonal dysfunction or gut dysfunction and things that we need to fix first. But when I take a look at their activity, I'm like, oh my God, you're doing 25,000 steps a day. You're taking Orange Theory 3 times a week, Pilates twice a week. Then you're also telling me you want to lift weights and you're 46.
Right.
So, but there's this mentality of, if I want to be smaller and lose weight, I have to do more, and I need to eat less. They're like, oh, I need to eat less. And I look at their food log and I'm like, you need to eat more. So there's a lot of, I wind up being a coach who challenges a lot of their long held beliefs around what it means to be healthy and what it means to be in shape and what it means to actually have a lean physique. I also think a lot of women, unfortunately, don't strength train. And they don't start doing it young enough. And I always say, like, muscle is your metabolic insurance policy, especially as you get older. I'm in perimenopause right now. By the grace of God, I've had a great experience so far, but I honestly attribute it to the fact that I have a lot of muscle for my frame. And when you look at studies, there's studies that do show that women who have less muscle tend to experience more menopausal symptoms, those negative menopausal symptoms. So I'm talking about like the hot flashes, and I'm talking about the night sweats and the mood swings. So I think that there's just I'm a very big muscle centric person. Obviously my bodybuilding background does that to me too, but
Sure.
I still have a lot of women who come to me and they've never really done any strategic, structured, progressive overload focused strength training in their life. Maybe they've done grit or Les Mills or a boot camp or an Orange Theory. They've taken some CrossFit classes, but they've never actually tried to put muscle on their frame. They've spent the majority of their life cutting calories, trying to be smaller, trying to be leaner, paleo, Whole30, like cutting carbs, keto, intermittent fasting. And the focus is always to just lose, not let me build some muscle,
Right.
That type of thing. So I feel like I do a lot of education around that as well.
And what would you say is like, it's a just general example of, I'm not working out at all, I'm 46, woman, it's been 3 years. Where would you start someone generally?
I really like just 3 times a week strength training, just something really simple. 3 times a week, 45 minutes, 60 minutes. Like you do not need to be spending hours in the gym, which is another misconception I think women have. I'm a big believer in walking and weight training.
Yeah.
So a daily walk, preferably outside in nature, so that we're getting all of those, cortisol lowering benefits just from being outside. We're getting that fresh air. We're regulating our circadian rhythm. We're alleviating stress. I think walking does one of these, it strikes this beautiful double-edged sword here because it burns calories, but it also lowers cortisol. Most exercise sends cortisol up at a time in women's lives when I don't like saying becoming more cortisol dominant, that's a little bit of a farce, but when we're becoming less resilient to the effects of cortisol because we have lowering sex hormones. And so progesterone and estradiol work as like this protective buffer against the effects of cortisol. So women find they feel more sensitive to the effects of cortisol. We get more anxious and more stress response. So we need to watch how much extra stress we dump on our systems through exercise. So walking is great because it actually, studies show it lowers cortisol and it stabilizes the HP axis, but it simultaneously burns calories. And then I like strength training as a complement to that. I'm not, some HIIT sessions every once in a while, if a woman doesn't have a high enough stress load, are totally okay, as long as they're true HIIT and they're done maybe once a week, twice a week, super short, real intense, get in and get out. Other than that, that's about all I have my women do. Maybe strength training 4 times a week. Again, if she's got the time and
Sure,
she's a more advanced athlete or something like that. But in general, 3 times a week strength training, walk every single day, 30 minutes to 60 minutes if you can. That's great. some yoga if you want to do something extra, parasympathetic function, and then hit maybe once or twice a week, something super short, 5 to 10 minutes of intervals, and that you're good. Like you
Good.
don't have to do
Yeah.
much more than that.
No, for sure. I did want to touch on in the gym because I see this a lot or hear this a lot. So women, how long on average, again, we're
Mhm.
talking broad here, but in between a strength training set, like for, lifting, how long should they
Mhm.
generally wait?
It would depend if it's a strength set or if it was a like accessory set. So in
Mhm.
other words, when I say that, I'm saying, is it a compound lift? Are we working multi joints? Are we working whole body? Are we doing a squat or are we doing a leg curl? Are we
Yes.
focused on strength? Or are we focused on hypertrophy? Anything that's strength focused, when we're talking about a multi joint compound movement, you're going to want to take 2-3 minutes in between your sets
Mhm.
to wait so that you can give the maximum intensity to that next set when you step in.
Yep.
Hypertrophy movements, you're talking about leg extension, you're doing like a 3x10, so 3 sets of 10 repetitions. I tell people 60 seconds, maybe a minute 30 if you are really pushing it, but you don't have to wait much longer than that. But in general, a lot of women want to do circuit work or
Yes.
supersets. And I get it too. I like moving in my workouts, but I
Right.
also know it's not productive because the intensity in the set is what creates the stimulus for the muscle to grow. If you're just flinging light weight around because you're not resting long enough to actually be able to lift anything heavier,
Yes.
you're not eliciting a strong enough stimulus on the body to create a change. And as we get older, too, that stimulus creates a good hormonal response in our bodies, which we need.
Right.
So it's going to give you a shot of growth hormone and testosterone release. And we need that as we get older as women because our hormones are going like this. So you give it that stimulus in the gym and you're going to get those little boosts throughout the course of the week.
No, I think it's a really good delineation between like the hypertrophy or accessory work, as you put it, like the smaller muscle group versus a compound movement and how long in between. Because I'll see like squat, a glute bridge, and a squat jump or something like circuited, and then bicep curls, and it's like a four movement circuit, and just boom, boom, boom. Now, outside of like you're traveling, you're super busy that day, and you just have to
Mhm.
get it in. Like I totally get that, but just from
Yeah.
a programming standpoint, I think that's a really good um, recommendation so that they, because guys were meatheads, right? Like we're like, oh, I want to lift, I want to lift more. So it's like women, we don't know much, but if you take that little bit out of our toolbox, like it'll help. We promise, and you won't look like a man. It's not going to happen,
Yeah.
but you'll get the, as you mentioned, you'll get the stimulus response. You'll get the right hormones working. I think a big thing too is just some kind of strength training to help with like blood sugar regulation. I remember just telling people, like, I don't care if you use bands, like just you're doing nothing. Like if you just did something, it'll help do that. Or, you mentioned walking plenty of times too.
Walking does that too. Like walking
Mhm.
is a great way to stimulate insulin sensitivity, to push glucose channels to that cell membrane and just give your body a reason to use what's coming in. A great hack for insulin issues. If I have somebody who's got like slightly elevated blood glucose in a lab or an elevated A1C or even an elevated insulin, because I like looking at insulin as well
Yep.
versus just glucose and A1C,
Yep.
is walk for a couple of minutes after
After a
eating.
meal. Yep.
Stand while you eat if you can. Like if, I'm at a desk right now, but this is also a standing desk, I usually eat most of my meals standing and then I just try to move around for a couple minutes
Yep.
after I eat. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but it really just helps stimulate your body to use what's coming in and to just level out that blood glucose.
Yeah, and other, and this, but just for those out there, like digestion too, like just digesting,
Yes.
nutrient partitioning, the blood glucose regulation, all those
Yep.
things happen, but you don't have to do like the new trendy hack where you're doing cartwheels after every meal. It's like
No,
just move,
just move a
just
little bit.
movement. Yeah, we're just made to move, and that's good. And with resistance training, especially, like I grew up kind of similar time frame where with women in the 90s, that's when I was first getting into training. That's how I got into the field. It was more the aerobics trend and all that. And I think
Mhm.
a lot of the women in kind of that midlife phase, that's what they were being indoctrinated with in, their teens and early 20s, to where now they're thinking like, oh, I remember that, like I got to go back and do that. And I think, hey, the science has changed, like, and we know what's better. And it's interesting too, because a lot of them will talk about, well, I don't want to be a big bodybuilder, but I'm like, okay, well, do you want to live on your own or go to assisted living? Like, what do you mean? Well, of course I want to live on my own. I was like, okay, well, the number one indicator between assisted living and non-assisted living has been if elderly person, does any form of resistance training. Like, even just the CDC guidelines minimum is like massively different between if you need help with assisted living or not.
Mhm.
So even if you're not doing it for, as you were mentioning too, like even if you're not doing it for cosmetics or, whatever, it's just general health and longevity and being able to function and take care of yourself. There's so many benefits to it.
Correct. When you look at the science, it shows that metabolism does not actually start to decline until we reach our 60s. But
Mm,
what does start to decline in our 30s is our muscle mass.
hmm
Sarcopenia is not just for old people, like it's not just for geriatrics. Muscle loss starts happening in your 30s if you're not actively doing anything to keep it going. And I will always circle back to muscle is your metabolic powerhouse. It is your metabolic insurance policy. When you look at what comprises metabolism, you're talking about your BMR or your basal metabolic rates, your resting metabolic rate, which is essentially the amount of calories that you burn at rest. It's what I burn sitting here on my butt doing nothing but having a conversation with you.
sure.
And then you also have this component from NEAT, which is exercise thermogenesis, right? Just moving throughout the course of the day, right?
hmm
Fidgeting, me talking with my hands here. I have the exercise component, what I burn through structured exercise. And then there's like a tiny little bit that you burn through like eating, right?
hmm
So I burn some calories digesting my food and things like that. But the biggest component out of all of those components that I just listed of metabolism is your BMR or your resting metabolic rate, right?
hmm
And that is shaped by your muscle.
Yep.
So I think it's like 60% of your metabolism is RMR, BMR. So you're talking about this big old chunk is dependent on how much muscle do you have that's active tissue, that's burning calories even at rest. You want to be lifting. You want to be sustaining, as much muscle as you possibly can. And that doesn't mean getting big and that doesn't mean getting bulky.
Right.
That's I've been lifting consistently since I was 18 and I have yet to get big and bulky. So that's the women who carry that look are shooting for that look. They're working for that look. They
Right.
maybe have assistance for that look. They're not just your average person who's trying to maintain as much muscle as they possibly can. So there should be we lack the hormonal capacity as women to be bulky like that. Women who have that look have specifically done certain things, made certain choices to have that look.
Right.
So the average woman has no need to fear, being big and bulky. I think there's a lot more to fear from not lifting, not having that metabolic, robustness as you get older, not having that bone strength, because again, we talked about bone strength for like a hot minute with the ovulation, but lifting weights builds bone strength too. And we need that as we age. I personally don't want to be the old woman who's afraid to fall, or the old woman who can't go on a hike, or who can't go to the grocery store, or who can't get herself on and off the toilet for herself.
Right.
So there's an aspect of anti-aging to this as well, longevity, of being able to have freedom as we get older as women, because our bodies are not failing us too soon.
Yeah, and I think, just what I hear you saying in there too is like, if we paint the picture for people, um, so as they're aging, they're losing muscle, they feel like they need to lose weight, and everyone online, from a physics standpoint, it's an accurate statement, but calories in, calories out. So they think, well, I'm gonna eat a lot less. Well, now they're micronutrient deficient, they're not getting enough protein, yada yada. So they're losing even more muscle. And then I need to burn more. So I'm gonna go do a bunch of HIIT training and just kill myself, which doesn't generally build muscle, probably more muscle than sitting on a couch. I guess that's debatable, but but then if you've switched the whole approach and build them up, it sounds like, which is what you do, fill the gaps in their nutrition, fuel that lean body mass, and then build that nice long runway for them to continually lose the fat that they want to lose, or whatever the case their goal is, and then while building strength and being metabolically healthy over time, which again, these things take time.
Yeah.
That is going to get them out of that vicious cycle. Do I have that right? Kind of
Yeah. Yeah. You absolutely do.
just as we're unpacking all this and kind of landing the episode, if you will, here. Um, are there any other tips or common things that you would like people out there to kind of walk away with, that's practical? Outside of finding someone who I think is the number one, is like finding someone who has put the time into the credentials like you have, and getting that comprehensive coach to kind of really walk them through this. But are there any other things out there that come to mind?
I think that's a great point that you just made. Finding a good coach, a credentialed coach. I think there's I think the women's space right now is so predatory, particularly in the demographic that I coach, which is primarily women, over 35, age 40 to 60. A lot of misinformation, false information. I've had these conversations with other coaches because I've been a coach for 18 years. So I can remember when information was not as readily available as it was now. And that has its own sets of problems, right?
Sure.
Not having access to good information. But then I think that the flip side is present now, in which we have so much information that people are just paralyzed. They're almost they're so confused because there's just so much out there. And so I think, being discerning about who you're following, who you're listening to, you know, are you just following somebody who looks good on social media and who's got millions of followers? Or are you following somebody who's actually trying to put, good information out there and give good information and education and things like that? So yeah, finding a good coach and following good educational sources would maybe be one. Also, don't feel, I always start very slow with my clients because change is hard. I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, but change is hard for me. I was talking about this with my husband the other night because he's been making some changes to his diet and he's struggling with it, and he already eats well and exercises and things like that. And so change is hard for every single person. And when you try to overhaul everything all at once, it can feel very overwhelming and you can just sort of be very tempted to throw up your hands and quit. So I think in listening to this podcast and listening to other podcasts and taking in all of this information, like, even if you start really small, it's better than not doing anything. Starting small, doing a few basic things, focusing on the big movers of change: sleep, nervous system regulation, nutrition, things like that, versus ordering another supplement that you probably don't need,
Right.
Those types of things. So just starting small and focusing on the basics, honestly.
Yeah, no, I think those are great points, because it's like motivation's really high, and I'll use this analogy before, but it's always the I'm going to start on Monday person, right? And we're all the I'm going to start on Monday person to some degree. And it's like, just start now and start slow. Start with one meal, or start with one little healthy thing you're going to do, and build
Yeah.
up. And it's on the one hand, there are things out there that just frankly don't work. And there are other things that don't ask your coach or ask people, is this good or bad? Because it's not a good or bad. Is it the right thing for you at the right time? Because like I could recall like strength athletes that were like pounding fast food and pizza and drinking beer 4 days a week, and they're like, bro, how much creatine should I take? I was like, what? Like, so it's on the flip side too, like just starting small, because like there might be a lot of those things that are good out there for you, but it's like, oh, I saw a post about magnesium, I saw one about vitamin D, I saw one about walking, I saw one
Shiny
about
object syndrome.
yeah. And it's like, just all those things are good, and it's good to know and all that, but like I think step one is like, look at it as an investment in your education. Like, almost like if you hire a good coach, your in my opinion, your the value you pay for that, oh, I pay this much for 3 months, 6 months, whatever. But it explodes if you go at it as a student, in my mind. Because I've
ROA can be, or ROI,
yes,
excuse me, can be huge.
I've had coaches still to this day that I work with in many different modalities, and I don't look at it as like, what am I getting out of it right now? I look at it like, wow, for the next 30 years, like however long, I'm going to have this knowledge that no one can take this away from me. So,
And a knowledge that's relevant to you, which I
Correct.
also find to be something worth mentioning, and which is that information that you glean from a post or even a podcast. And I say this often in my own podcast as well. I always say I'm speaking generally, guys. I'm not
Yeah.
speaking in specifics, right? This is non-specific generalized guidance. That's the best you're going to get from any external informative source like that, versus when I work with my clients, it's personalized. They tell me about their schedule, how they live their life, what's non-negotiable for them, what they're willing to negotiate. Pizza night is non-negotiable for me. How can I work around that? And we
Sure.
build strategies that work for them that they can then use to not just get results, but sustain those results for the rest of their life. Because it's not just about, is this, you talked about good and bad, which is a whole nother conversation, but
Right.
it's not about, is this good or bad or right or wrong? It's, is this relevant for me?
Right.
Does this matter for the context of my life and my health concerns and my physique goals and things like that? So sometimes working with a coach can be powerful just from that personalization aspect, because
Yeah,
hopefully
almost.
the coach you're working with is doing the personalization aspect.
Yeah, and even just giving you that permission to do that thing that you thought was like so bad, and you're going to shame yourself because you're going to do it anyways. And it's like, no, no, we can work around it. Just be honest with me,
Nope.
and I can help you.
We
It's
can.
like I know a lot of. I'll just from again anecdotal, just kind of with women, right? Like, what's like one of the most stressful things if you're working all day, taking care of the family, do this, do that. Oh crap, what are we gonna have for dinner? Like, go out with your family, go out with your husband, whatever, have a date night. Like, no, these are things that you should be able to do is coach you around the week or even in that night, like how to make a little bit smarter choices. But
Yes.
sometimes we just got done talking about how bad the stress is on them. Like sometimes you gotta just chill out, so it's just
Yes.
finding
Oh
that
my
balance.
gosh. Yeah. Good point.
Well, where can people find you? We've talked about the podcast. I'm going to have all this in the show notes, but I just want to give you kind of, if you could give the audience out there a rundown where they can find you, your
Yeah.
podcasts, your socials, all that fun stuff.
So my podcast is the Revive Wellness podcast, and it's available on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Music, all platforms. You can also directly access it through my website. My website is just revivewellness.health. My Instagram is at Allison Fahrenbach, all one word. I am most active on Instagram. I do have a Facebook, but I don't that much. And
Sure.
I'm at the age where one social media platform is good enough for me.
Sure.
I am in my DMs often. I welcome people to be social with me on social media. Like, I don't
Awesome.
just want my audience to read my posts. I want them to feel like they can talk to me, they can connect with me, they can ask me questions. I am genuinely a coach that wants to help.
That's
So
awesome.
if you ever, want to reach out to me, you are welcome to. You can email me through my website. You can email me through my podcast. I am a one-woman show, so you will not get an assistant who answers emails. You won't get a setter in my DMs. You will get me.
That's
And I
awesome.
love connecting with people. So you are welcome to reach out to me, at any time.
Well, I think that came through during today's episode. So I really appreciate that and you joining us and coming on. A lot of great information to unpack. And for all those out there, just remember to please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our podcast. And as Allison was just mentioning, like put your questions in the comments because I will gladly take her up on that and I'll send them to her. I'll DM her
Yeah,
for you or I'll email her for you guys and get it back out there. So definitely send those questions in. She mentioned she's got a passion, wants to help people. So if you
absolutely.
need help, raise your hand. We're here for you. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you
Thank you so
guys.
much.